there some specific steps you guys talked about to address the racial divisions that have been, heated because of the migrant influx? And like, is that like knocking on doors? Is that events? Is that, faith events? Like, what kind of specific steps are you going to take to heal?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is that we have to tell the entire truth and the entire story. Because this notion that it's only black people who are concerned about the migrant crisis is not true.
That's right.
So some of the conversation around this division, there are individuals who want to score political points, to sow these negative seeds, to get us fighting one another. But in order for me to have an entire commission dedicated to reparations, as well as an entire office dedicated to reentry, a dedicated revenue stream for the unhoused, that requires black, brown, and white votes. In fact, the city council has actually demonstrated that even the things that black folks are concerned about, that it turns out that other members of city council agree. Look, the whole impetus behind what's happening at the border is for extremism in this country to plant these seeds of negativity to divide our city. And so what we are doing as a city is what this city did when they elected me, is that we surround ourselves around our values. We speak to our values by passing paid time off, by abolishing sub-minimum wage, which of course is going to benefit black and brown people, and that we're going to continue to do what we do best, and that's organize our communities around the values that make the city of Chicago the greatest city in the world.
Mayor, you're here with a number of black pastors, and one of the issues that we've seen happen or not happen is black churches stepping up to take in some of these migrants. Did your discussions today include any discussions about black churches stepping up, and are you asking pastors to do that part in this situation?
The beauty of this moment is that I don't have to ask people who are tethered to a faith that's bigger than a government to step up and do right by people. There are black leaders that are stepping up and leaning in and supporting migrants in this moment. There are black pastors who are stepping up and making sure that the dollars that are appropriated for violence prevention, that the council is prepared to vote for that. The whole work around reentry, Reverend Marshall Hatch has an entire village on the west side of Chicago called the Ma Alpha Project that is dedicated to making sure that individuals who are formerly incarcerated get another chance at economic security.
But about the migrants, I mean, have you had any discussions about
What I'm saying is that black leaders in this city have always stood up for what is right. They're doing what they've always done, which is leaning in and supporting not just this crisis, but every single crisis that this city has had to endure. What we don't ever have to debate is where the black church stands when it comes to justice. And this situation is no different. I've answered your question.
I haven't heard you answer the question about whether you.
Which part of my question are you not understanding? What part of my answer that you're not understanding?
Whether you've asked them to step up.
What I'm saying is that they've already done it, is what I'm saying. They're already done it.
I don't understand where.
You don't understand that they've already done it? Can we move on? Because apparently, I've said it repeatedly, let me just so I'm clear, that black pastors have already stepped up in this moment. Of course, we're having conversations about how the federal government and the state government has to do more. But I wanted to be emphatically clear, because if you're not hearing it, I want you to hear it clear. Black pastors are stepping up as they always have stepped up.
I do have a different question, but I am going to back off my colleague in saying, I think he's just asking how many churches have taken in families. Our churches taking families in. That's it.
Sure. Well, a number of them have stepped up, and we're going to continue to push for more of them to step up.
All right, but I do have a question on a different topic. Can you talk a little bit about your pick as the new health commissioner, why she was chosen, and why you believe she will make a better health commissioner than Allison Arwady?
Well, as you know, public health is an important part of my administration, and as I've said repeatedly, our work to pass treatment, not trauma, was an essential part of my campaign, and we've delivered on that promise. opening up mental health clinics, which were shut down by a couple administrations ago, that we are obviously moving with expedition to make sure that public health reaches every single neighborhood. Dr. Ige is an incredible human being. Quite frankly, she really imbibes the collaborative, competent, compassionate spirit that I've said from the very beginning that leadership in my administration has to imbibe. And the vote and the confidence that she has from community leaders as well as key stakeholders that understand that public health has to be a system of care, that she represents the values in which the people of Chicago want to see in their public health commissioner.
Mayor, in addition to what you said a moment ago about the efforts of clergy stepping up to address the migrant crisis and your calls repeatedly on the state and federal government to step in for help, given all of that, is it time for your office to acknowledge that the city is struggling to address the needs of this crisis?
I don't know which part of my time in 6 months as mayor that we have not acknowledged that we cannot bear the responsibility alone. That this responsibility, of course, has placed a tremendous amount of stress on families. That has always been acknowledged.
But I guess specifically at our juncture now, I mean, we're entering winter months. It's getting colder. I think people are curious about what is the assessment of the proposed base camps. I mean, I don't know that people have seen tents pop up or things happening. So I
We
guess
have
that's
stood up.
my
Yeah,
question
I
is-
think I understand your question. I think
Yeah.
I understand the second part of your
Sure.
your question. Is that what are we doing in this moment?
Right, as the city
Yeah.
moving quickly enough to address this crisis?
Well, look, I've stood up a brand new shelter every single week since I've been in office. That we renegotiated a contract with a staffing agency that I inherited to reduce costs. We put out RFPs for support for individuals who can help manage facilities, as well as provide food and support. But what we can't lose sight of is that the plan that I have put forth and I've carried out, that it requires investments from the state and the federal government. I've said that repeatedly. I pushed hard for, national policy to reflect the demands of this moment. I've said from the very beginning that foreign policy, particularly the sanctions that have been placed on Central and South America, has exacerbated the economic turmoil that these countries have had to endure as a result of bad foreign policy. I'm grateful that President Biden has eased those sanctions. It has caused some level of stability around the border, and they have to still do more. And so my work continues as we continue to administer our plan to remove people out of police stations who are sleeping on floors, pregnant women and children, and putting them into temporary shelter that gives them a little bit more dignity.
Is there any update on the 18 and California agreement that the city recently signed? What would you say to Alderman Julia Ramirez? She claimed for more transparency, and residents has been protesting that they don't want migrants over there.
Well, we continue to have conversations with alders across the city, and my job is to make sure that we are identifying sites that can ultimately help us deal with this crisis. But make no mistake about it, that the plan that we have in place requires the state and the federal government to lean in to provide additional support. Now, my administration has been very clear that without the state and federal government leaning in, providing more financial support for our city, that the sustainability of this operation just becomes that much more arduous.
What about the agreement on the environmental issues over there?
So I'm glad you mentioned the environmental dynamic that I'm dealing with as the mayor. It's why I've reinstituted the Department of the Environment. It's why we push for this cumulative impact study. Quite frankly, it's why we've been that much more thorough on these sites to make sure that whatever environmental dynamics that exist there, if it's not suitable, we obviously will have to address that. Unfortunately, environmental justice has not been the prevailing form of leadership in this city for a very long time. My administration has taken this head on, and I'm confident that, during this crisis, as we continue to explore other sites, that if environmental hazards do materialize, then of course it's incumbent upon my administration, as I've committed to do, is to address it.
I have another question. Do you have any information about migrants from Venezuela being deported from Gary, Indiana airport to Venezuela?
I'm not aware of that.
I did find it interesting that Pastor Gordon told us he was on the trip, since we never knew he went on the trip, since we were never given a list of anyone who went on the trip. Good to hear it now, but it would have been nice to hear it before. But that's my comment, not my question. My question is, there are reports of electricity being installed at the vacant lot at 115th and Halsted today. So why is there no official announcement that a tent city is going to come when you've said you haven't made a decision, but yet there's electricity being put in?
Here's what I've said. Whether it's that particular site or the site on 38th in California, that we have assessed both of those sites, and what needed to happen last week happened, where there was an additional step to make sure that all voices were heard that have had desires for that particular section of the city to be invested in. Now, throughout this entire process, I've had conversations with community members, and the community, particularly in the 21st Ward, wanted to have yet another conversation, and we did that. And we have not made it, we've always made it clear that the whole point of acquiring that land was not just for the economic development that we will see at the end of this crisis, at least this iteration of the crisis, but the whole impetus behind that particular agreement was so that development would happen there. So I've always been very clear about that particular site, that it will ultimately become a space where the people of the 21st Ward will have an opportunity to grow and develop, but it also will be a site like many other sites that we are assessing to help us deal with this particular crisis.
So when will the tents go in?
So, you know, the process by which these tents are erected, it's actually quite thorough. So, you know, as we continue to, again, not just assess the sites around environmental justice, but the entire capacity that these sites will ultimately be asked to carry, it's incumbent upon my administration to be as thorough as possible. And so I'm moving with expediency. Again, the ultimate goal is to remove people out of police stations and get them off the floors of police stations, and
Mayor,
of course
that
remove them
doesn't
from
answer the question
outside.
still, though.
So thank you all
Mayor,
very
would you ever
much.
consider would you ever consider turning the buses around? When the buses arrive here saying, you know what, there's no more room at the end. We do no longer have the capacity to take anyone else. Maybe it's time to turn the buses around.
Look, do we need better immigration policy in this country? Everybody recognizes that. And I've said this repeatedly, you know, that foreign policy and national policy has not done its due diligence to meet this particular crisis, but the crisis that existed well beyond this moment. And here's the part that's actually worth reporting, I think, it's my opinion, is that when 30,000 Ukrainians arrived in this city who were seeking refuge here, there was no discussion, none. There are more Ukrainian, just give me a second, all right? There are more Ukrainian refugees here in the city of Chicago than asylum seekers. And no one raised a single question. And you know why? Because they had federal dollars attached to them. What I'm simply saying is that if we're going to have real equity and parity in this country, we have to make sure that our policies reflect true equity and that they're consistent. So thank you all very much.
115th and Halsted
and 38th, they're still in